Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I want to welcome you here to this beautiful township building in West Goshen on this lovely day here in the great state of Pennsylvania. Right? Did I get it all down right? Yeah. This morning's hearing is on childcare and early childhood education, and I'm Representative Joe Cerisi. I'm filling in for the chairman of the committee, Ryan Bizzarro, one of the vice chairs. Ryan couldn't be here today, but passes his regards on to everybody. You see we have a full panel of legislators here from all over the state and a full panel of testifiers. So a couple of housekeeping rules: please silence your cell phones. We do have a schedule to keep to because we want to be able to have everyone be able to ask questions. We ask that you don't read your testimony, that you just give us an overview of your testimony. What we're going to ask is we'll take the first three testifiers and then questions. So all the legislators who may have questions, just write them down for the first three. We'll divide it up and then ask the next three. And we're due to finish around 11:30, but it'll take as long as everyone feels like staying. So before we begin, I would ask that we start introductions of who's here so you know who all of us are. And as we start all the way on my left with Representative Dianne Williams.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dianne Williams. I represent the 74th District. I am a neighbor and happy to be here this morning.
Hi, I'm Representative Melissa Schusterman. I represent Chester and Montgomery County, Tredyffrin, Schuylkill, Phoenixville, and Upper Providence. Great to be here.
Good morning. I'm State Rep Christina Sappy, representing the 158th and representing half of West Goshen. So welcome to part of my district. It's great to be here. So yeah, West Goshen all the way out to Avondale. Good to see a lot of you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Carol Hill Evans. I am State Representative for the 95th Legislative District in York County.
Good morning. I'm Pam Delisio. I represent the 194th, which are parts of Philadelphia and Montgomery County.
Like I said, I'm State Rep Joe Cerisi. I represent the 146th, which is the western part of Montgomery County.
Good morning, Tina Davis, Bucks County. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Good morning, Mark Longetti. I represent the 7th District in Mercer County, which is at the Ohio border between Pittsburgh and Erie.
Hi, I'm State Representative Austin Davis. I represent Allegheny County, the Mon Valley portion of Allegheny County, and I serve as the chairman of the Allegheny County Democratic Delegation of Legislators.
Good morning. I'm Representative Chris Sonata. I am the State Representative from the 9th District, which is in Lawrence County on the Ohio border, and I also chair the House Veteran Affairs and Emergency Preparedness Committee.
Good morning. My name is Mike Zabel, and I represent the heart of Delaware County.
I'm Representative Frank Burns from Cambria County.
Thank you all, and I want to thank Representative Herrin for hosting this. I'm going to turn it over to you now to run from here, so thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to thank all my fellow legislators and their representatives who are here today for being here. Thank you. And I want to thank West Goshen Township for hosting, of course, and the House Democratic Policy Committee, and especially our panelists who come here today to give us this really important information. Thank you. So I want to tell you why I chose this topic for a policy hearing. I am a freshman. I've been a state representative in the 156th District here in the Westchester area for 8 months. And the first 6 months, we all describe it as a fire hose because everyone calls you, everyone wants to meet with you to talk about their priorities and their needs. When I was approached by First Up, the Advocacy organization that represents early childhood education providers, I was struck profoundly because I learned so much about early childhood education and why it is so essential and why we need to make this a priority, not just here in this district and not just in Chester County, but throughout the Commonwealth. Just a few points. I think some people think that early childhood education is babysitting. It is not. These are the most formative years when it comes to human development. It is an essential service. It requires trained educators who are currently very much underpaid, who can today go to Target and earn more money to cash people out of the line. It is not a women's issue. It's a family issue. It's an economic issue. Early childhood education must be accessible, it must be high quality, and it must be affordable so parents can get back to work and we can fill the worker shortage that we're currently experiencing. And our children deserve quality care because our kids are our most valuable resource. We as a community and as a commonwealth and as a society must prioritize our children because they are our future and they are going to face many challenges and they need to be prepared to lead. So with that, here's how we're going to proceed today. We're going to start with a couple of a local provider and a local parent who's going to talk about their story. Then we're going to give it a broader perspective with Carol Austin and Kimberly Earley. And then we're going to touch on some of the economic issues as well. And then we're going to talk about where we go from here from a policy perspective. We have all these great legislators here to hear the ideas. So we would like to start then with Betsy Billy, who is Executive Director of the Westchester Area Daycare Center right here in the borough of Westchester. She leads a team of very dedicated early childhood education providers who've brought child care and early childhood education to hundreds of children, many first responders, many essential workers here in this district. She has her BS in early childhood education and teaching from Westchester University. So thank you for being here, Betsy. We can move the mic over, please. Thank you. Morning.
Thank you for having us. Like said, I'm Betsy Billy, Executive Director. Westchester Area Daycare Center has been in the heart of the borough for...
There we go. Oh, goodness. There we go. I'm used to talking to children, so I don't need this. They hear me loud and clear. We've been in the borough since 1962, so a long, long time. And we have the word daycare in our name, which is kind of the taboo word right now. You know, we're childcare. We don't care for days and it's just not days and stuff like that. But being around for almost 60 years, it just was not our priority to change that right now. That is our focus. So I've been there for 30 and a half years. We are a Star 4 center. And if we want to go into what Keystone Stars is,
just briefly,
first,
okay. Yes,
so basically Keystone Stars is a rating system in Pennsylvania, and it really helped nonprofits like us because we don't have the money for big advertising. We don't have academy and learning center and that kind of stuff in our name, but we've been doing the same educational things as everyone else has been doing for 60 years. So when Keystone Stars came around, it helped us be on the same playing field. Kind of did the research for you. They go through every book you have, every tool you have, your centers, your business practices, your environment, your teacher credentials, everything. So it really ups from licensing all the way up to Star 4. So we're a Star 4. So we do get money back from ELRC, which is Early Learning Resource, where the subsidized families go. So that was tremendous because that finally gave us kind of a leg up. We've been taking care of low-income families. That's our goal. This entire time, but low-income families has kind of been a little redefined now. They qualify for free and reduced meals, but we have about 30% who just miss that. It's the middle class, it's private families, but there's no way they can afford childcare at the rates that they are. So we try and keep ours very, very low, and STARS helps us to do that with that money. They used to do education retention awards, which is where my staff is unbelievable. We have the lowest teacher turnover rate, I would challenge, in Pennsylvania. There's about 5 of us that have been there over 25 years, and another group of like 7 that have been there from like 15 to 25 years. So you do not find that in childcare. So they're the reason, really, that we still exist and are successful. But we used to have this retention award, and it was something to look forward to, especially in early childcare. It was like a CD or a savings account, something like that. But with all the given things, they can't do that anymore. So we can't afford those kind of bonuses ourselves, being a nonprofit. So we hope that that comes back. We hope that the add-on stays on, because it's the only way I'm going to keep these poor people with us. What else? So with our center also, we're part of the CACFP program, Child and Adult Care Food Program. To meet the requirements of that program, it's all child care nutrition. It's real food and no fillers and that kind of stuff. We have to put in about $45,000 of our own dollars just to meet their requirements that they put in the menus, but will not pay you what it's worth to get those things. So if people are in that program, they better be prepared to put out a lot of their own dollars too, because what you get reimbursed in no way covers the meals whatsoever. With STARS and that requirements, they basically, like licensing, I'll give you one example. Licensing requires 6 hours of training. STARS will require like 18 to 21. Our center, I think, is a little bit different because I did teach there for 13 years and been the director for 17. So I know what to value in teachers. So a STARS example would be they need 4 hours of prep time a month. We give 2.5 hours a week because they need that time. I don't want them going home with work and all, so they can focus on the kids. During the pandemic, we were closed for 90 days. We opened in June with the same exact core group that I had. During that time, parents did not have to pay for the closure, but my teachers got paid, thank goodness for the PPP loans. And they worked harder during that time than I've ever seen them in my 30 years. They got up at 7 o'clock in the morning to do infant sing-alongs. They were doing puppet shows and singing. They were doing videos from backyards with farm animals and all kinds of stuff, which was incredible. They really showed everything. And then when they came back, it's like, we can't afford bonuses. We can't afford a pay increase even, because we're just trying to stay open. We were going to have a new playground built last summer. That got nixed too, because I have to make sure if this happens again, or our focus is being able to open our doors for our families. During that time too, when parents were home teaching their kids, I think a lot of the schools said, oh, they'll have the stuff that they need. They have construction paper and pencils. Teach your kids at home. And our parents, I got nonstop emails of, how am I supposed to do this? I don't have this stuff at home. I don't have poster board or construction paper and all that. So thank goodness with our connections with like the Chester County Food Cupboard, ABC Paper Company, we got like the automated toilet paper and things like that that we could put outside, and it went every day. Every day that stuff went. So these families really needed it, and they had nowhere else, to go to access it except like my emails, because they weren't sure because they're home, staying home. And then when we reopened, we did become a virtual classroom in one room with almost 8 schools represented from kindergarten through 4th grade. And there was a myriad of teachers, probably like 16 different teachers teaching 16 different ways through Zooms and things like that, but we made it through. I think what else? There's so much about us that I can tell you about. I'd say financially, with ELRC and those funds, it really needs to be looked at and revamped, because right now, if you're a low-income family and you take 5 days off, you're suspended from the 6th day on. So basically they're telling you, if you're low income and you have a family and you want to go away, or you saved your money, you can't go away for more than 6 days. We're going to suspend your funding. That's ridiculous. They also do, they base it on attendance, not enrollment. So last summer during this, they had done just enrollment. If they were enrolled, we got paid, which was perfect. Because if they were sick, they could stay home, and we still got paid. It's not, oh my God, am I going to lose my funding? If I don't go, I'm going to lose my funding. If my kid misses 5 days, they were petrified. So that was wonderful that they didn't count the days, because they only get 45 days absent for the year. So they keep that in mind, like when can I keep my child out, stuff like that. So I think that needs to be looked at seriously about enrollment versus attendance would be a serious thing, and the days off and things like that. Anything specific anybody wants to hear about? Because I'll go on and on about it.
Okay, well, we can certainly move on. I know we're going to have lots of questions for you. So.
Sounds good. I'll do better with questions.
Thank you, Betsy.
Just before we move on, I just want to say that Representative Patty Kim joined us, and Representative Derecha Miller joined us too. Well, Parker. My screw up. Derecha joined us. What districts you want to say where you represent?
Sure, I represent the 198th district, which is Germantown, Nicetown, Toledo, Logan, Stormfield, Allegheny West, and East Falls.
Good morning. I represent the 3rd district, which includes the city of Harrisburg. I apologize for my tardiness. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. So we will move on now to Mr. the Reaganese. All right. Who is a parent of a child who attends the Westchester Area Daycare Center. Mr. Reaganese is a composer, arranger, saxophonist, and is currently the director of jazz studies and a saxophone instructor at Westchester University. And I believe you're going to talk with us about, the financing and some of the economic challenges involved in ensuring that your child has high quality care. So thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. I didn't expect you to check out my bio. All right. Good morning to all of you, and I appreciate you having me here. My name is Jonathan Reaganese. I'm a saxophonist and composer, and I'm on the faculty at Westchester. I was there for 3 years temporary, and I was traveling back and forth from New York City. My wife is a violinist from the Netherlands. When we were in New York, we had our first son, Emlyn. He's now 2 years old. And when the pandemic happened, we were living uptown in Manhattan, and we were living in the epicenter of it. And we were actually in Pennsylvania, and when it all kind of went down for a sick relative, and then we decided to get some stuff and try to live with a family member for a while to see what happened. Well, that meant that we were displaced for about 6 months waiting and seeing, and our son was getting more rambunctious and more mobile. We started to realize that the adage, it takes a village, is not a joke, and that sitting at home by ourselves with no extra hands and a 9-month-old was a very lonely place to be and a very intense place at times. When we were in central Pennsylvania, we decided to see if we could get him care, even though it was in the middle of the pandemic, to see how that would go. He had been dealing with separation anxiety and all sorts of things due to the seclusion of the pandemic. And we were lucky enough to find a place that we could afford only for 2 days, but it was a very great facility. And within 2 weeks, his anxiety had gone away, and he was like a totally changed child. Not to mention, we started to feel sort of whole again because we could focus on the myriad details of a possible move and my new job and still not being in our home and all these types of things. So that was our first interaction with early childhood education as parents, and it made us realize how vital it was both for ourselves and for our son. But prior to that, when I lived in New York, I started a program with a director at a school there, at an early childhood center called Music Before Words. And this was an experimental and progressive program where we improvised and interacted musically only with children from as early as 6 months. And it was a really successful and interesting program, and it gave me an inside look at, from a director's perspective, of how challenging it was to have great teachers, and also how my wife and I realized immediately, is that this microphone? Let's see. Anyway, it gave me an inside look at how my wife and I, if we stayed in New York, would not be able to afford childcare for our son. So that was our first realization that as artists and regular citizens, that it was just going to be out of reach in an area like that. But even when we came to Pennsylvania, we found that the rates were still slightly out of our budget for the type of care that we needed. So when we moved to Westchester, we wanted to find care, and we were hoping to find 5 days a week if possible. We looked at about 6 or 7 different places, and our financial situation has been disrupted due to the pandemic. I'm fortunate to have my job, but my wife's been fully unemployed because she was Oh, it's down here. Just slide it over here. Okay. At any rate, when we came to Westchester, we were looking at these different schools, and basically with our fluctuating income that we couldn't really rely on due to unemployment running out, etc. We found schools that, again, we could only go to for 2 days a week, and that would be at the absolute top of our budget. I don't know why that's happening.
Oh, you have to turn that. Is that on? No, it's not on. No? Okay.
Okay. Maybe it's my voice in the microphone. At any rate, the places that we found, besides the Westchester Area Daycare Center where my son goes now, were either we were faced with only 2 days a week care, which would still be maximizing our budget, or a facility and a level quality of care that just didn't seem like something that we were willing to put our son in. Fortunately, a coworker recommended the Westchester Area Daycare, and their price point was at above and beyond what our budget was, which is essentially, like I say, our income is fluctuating, but between 12 and 17% of our take home. And that's no small number. We don't receive financial assistance, nor do I think we should at this time. But we decided, because we know how important it is for our son and for our own well-being with a 50-hour-a-week or more job, and we just had a second child as well, we need the care, and so we decided to go above and beyond our budget to make that happen. With him being there, his growth has been incredible, and the teachers he's had have been consistent, and they've been extremely positive, and yeah, it's just a marvel to watch him grow and how much he loves being there. And he's there pretty much at an equal amount of time that he is with us, since we take him there 5 days a week. And so the importance for his extension of what community is, and his socialization and his learning of the emotional contracts that we have we don't take that lightly, and we would immediately remove him if it wasn't to our liking. Fortunately, Betsy runs a really great center, and I know she has her own difficulties. But we've been so thankful to be able to have that care, because with my wife being unemployed, trying to figure out her business moving forward, us moving to a new place, now we have a 2.5-month-old daughter. We need the fluidity to be able to have him in a safe place where he can grow, so that we're not all in a 2-room apartment trying to figure out what to do next. I think that I'll wait for the solutions that I had until a later point with maybe some questions, but that's the general thrust of my experience in this area.
Okay, great. Thank you for sharing your personal experience. We really appreciate it. Folks?
There, is that better?
Just before we go on, I just want to announce we've been joined by Representative Kevin Boyle. Kevin, do you want to introduce yourself, where you're from?
Sure. I represent Kevin Boyle. I represent part of Philadelphia County and also Montgomery County. Thank you.
Thanks for coming. So we'll move on, and then we'll be taking questions shortly. So we're going to ask Carol Austin to speak next. Carol is Executive Director at First Step, a nonprofit organization that's committed to providing resources and assistance to early childhood education providers in southeastern Pennsylvania, and helping our programs reach national accreditation standards. She has her master's in education from Temple University. So thank you for being here, Carol. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. Thank you for holding this hearing.
A couple of things. First up, we are formerly called the Delaware Valley Association for the Education of Young Children, and many of you may know us by that name, as we were an affiliate of NACI, and now we are a chapter of PNACI. So for more than 50 years, we worked to increase the quality of childcare programs and early education programs in this southeast region, certainly. And we do that. We work with teachers to support them in their own professional development. We work inside of programs, coaching directors and staff to raise the quality to meet Keystone Star 3-4 standards or NACI accreditation standards. And that's what we do. And we do it all inside of a commitment to ensure that children have access to the highest quality early learning that they can have. For everything that Jonathan said, really on point, and that, Betsy said, it makes a difference. You can't trade off a quality early childhood experience. And I'll say that I come to this space in early childhood from, in my career, I started off in 9 to 12 in secondary education reform. And it's interesting because I can't talk about that work. It seems that I'm starting to cry. Every time I think about it, it saddens me because I've probably been in every school, high school in Philadelphia, in other places, and sitting, talking to those kids and seeing how hungry they are. Hungry they are for, an incredible, making a difference in their life, for success. I got so present time and time again to how much we had failed them. And I began to wonder, what if we actually started earlier? What if we actually gave them the kind of foundation that they needed? And early childhood education really is about that. Being able to give them that kind of start so that, they can learn those self-regulation skills, they can, those social interaction skills, social emotional, the strong foundation in reading and learning that helps set them up for success. When learning shifts to being able to, you need to be able to analyze what you read in 4th grade, you want to ensure that they have that kind of foundation so that they're set up for success. And that's what a quality early learning experience does. It sets them up for that. So that we can decrease the number of children dropping out of high school and therefore being involved in the criminal justice system and therefore not being able to enter the military or the police force because they're not meeting those literacy requirements or because they've been involved in the system. We can decrease the number of children who then have to have special educational services, which is a high cost factor in K-12. If we do this right and we get this right. But we haven't gotten it right because we haven't invested in early learning in the way that we need to. And that's the bottom line. And you talk about it, there's great bipartisan support. I get it, and it's not enough. It's never been enough. And, you hear, Betsy is an angel, really, because, even, she said, you see what her staff, they will do whatever for kids. They're not far from the highest paid people in the country, far from it, but there's a real commitment her staff has to really making a difference for children. And they'll do what it takes to ensure that children have what they need. But families, as you heard from John, they can't afford the cost of a high-quality early learning experience. We can't ask parents to do that. Now, there's some parents who can. I think, when we did a study a while ago, we made and doing the research and looking, the estimate that, infant toddler care in this region, quality infant toddler care, somewhere between $18,000 and $21,000 a child. In this field, we have ratios we need to meet to keep children safe. You can't, like in the K-12 system, have a teacher be in a room with 20, 30 kids. That doesn't work. And certainly the ratios for infants and toddlers are tight. So you need multiple people there to ensure their safety and security. And, and people don't appreciate, even with infants and toddlers, what starts to get created in terms of their own social, emotional development and their own regulation, from an early age that really sets them up for success. And we know that for pre-K, somewhere around like 13,000 or so, we have a pretty broad region here between Philadelphia and Chester County and Montgomery County, etc. But it's not inexpensive. And in many states, and I will say that most programs don't charge that. Okay? Because they know parents can't afford that. So programs continue to, be operated in these very narrow margins. Staff get paid what they paid in Pennsylvania. I think the average now is up to $10.71 or something like that an hour. And now they're struggling with staffing like never before because Wawa pays more. Target pays more. Heck, everybody pays more than early childhood. And so programs, and Betsy is fortunate in a sense. Hopefully that will continue. But many programs are really struggling. And you've seen from the data in my report, we've had another survey that was done showing that about 96% of providers show that they're really short of staffing, and 89% of those providers, they note that they had administrators in the classrooms to cover staffing shortages. Your programs that there's a waiting list now. The waiting list exists not because they don't need the money, but they don't have the staff to be able to take more children. So there's an impact when you think about the impact on families, the impact on the economy, people being able to go back to work. It's a real impact that's magnified now during these times. And this is an opportunity for us to do something about it once and for all. To actually do something, make a pretty significant statement about it, because we are all impacted, and the economy is impacted. So there's much more that I can say. I can say about the average teacher. There was a recent study done. We in an organization we've been doing a lot of trauma-informed work and supporting programs in being able to effectively, work with children and support their staff as well. And we've been partnering with Columbia's Bassett Center, and we had a team of, pediatricians kind of working with us on that, and they recently published the first report in JAMA Pediatrics, and that indicated that 50% of early childhood professionals are experiencing one of the following. They receive SNAP benefits. They didn't have enough money to provide adequate shelter or housing for themselves or their family. They didn't pay the full amount of the gas, oil, electricity, utility bills. They didn't have enough money to pay health care or medicine. And they currently work at a second job to get more income. And that's mostly the reality that exists. That's how, we treat the people who are making a difference for our children in their earliest years. That's what we do. And so, thank you for having me. It's time for us to not just think it's a great idea and to talk about it. And I know that there's a real commitment here. And I know that for the most part, most of you really understand the issues, but it really is time to act for all of us. So thank you.
Thank you all very much for your testimony. We've been joined by Representative Pauline Nelson. Just want to say where you're from, Pauline.
154th Legislative District of Montgomery.
Now we're going to open up to questions for the three panelists. Mark, Mangetti.
Oh, one more. Yes, we actually,
You want to go one
we
more?
were going to go with Kimberly.
Okay, I apologize.
To take questions.
All right, I apologize. Mark, you got to wait.
So our next panelist is Kimberly, Earley, Director of Public Policy and Advocacy at the Pennsylvania Association for the Education of Young Children. Prior to this role, she served as the Policy Director at the Pennsylvania Department of Health and as the Deputy Director of the Office of Policy Development at the Department of Human Services. She has her Master's of Social Work from Temple and a Bachelor's of Science in Psychology from the University of Pittsburgh. Ms. Earley, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, you did your research.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, or good morning, everyone. Thank you to Representative Cerisi and Representative Herrin, and also Chairman Bizzarro, and thanks to the members of the House Democratic Policy Committee for holding this hearing and for the opportunity to testify about the access for families of early childhood care and education. Again, my name is Kimberly Earley, and I'm with the Pennsylvania Association for the Education of Young Children. We're the Pennsylvania affiliate of the National Association for the Education of Young Children. And we represent, or PNACE represents, over 2,500 early childhood care and education professionals across Pennsylvania, and we also have 9 chapters throughout the Commonwealth. Our vision is that Pennsylvania families have access to high quality, affordable early childhood care and education, and opportunities for their children provided by a profession that is valued, well compensated, and supported. And PNACE is a part of the Start Strong PA campaign, as well as the Pre-K for PA campaign. Start Strong PA is a nonpartisan issue advocacy campaign that supports healthy development for children, working families, and the economy, and by increasing access and affordability of high-quality child care programs for Pennsylvania children and families. And then the Pre-K for PA campaign encourages Pennsylvania to invest those additional funds in high-quality pre-K by making increased annual investments in pre-K counts and Head Start State Supplemental Assistance Program items. Child care provides a critical development and enrichment opportunities for all children of all backgrounds and is a vital building block of our state's economy. The COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated how important child care is for our communities and has shown us the hardships that the child care industry has been struggling with for years. Those hardships have only been deepened by the pandemic. One-time federal and state relief funding for child care has come to Pennsylvania in the form of the $106 million in the CARES Act, in addition to the $116 million that the administration and the General Assembly allocated through discretionary CARES Act funds, as well as the $303 million in the CRISA funds, and most recently, $1.2 billion from the American Rescue Plan, which has yet to be allocated by the Wolf administration. Relief funding was intended to provide a critical support to help stabilize the sector. However, significant and sustainable investments continue to be needed to ensure that high-quality child care is affordable and accessible. The Start Strong campaign did hold 12 provider and family forums in April and May, and we conducted a survey on how Pennsylvania should build a stronger child care system through the ARP funds. Over 1,000 child care providers and families shared how they think we should stabilize and strengthen and secure PA system. And so there were recommendations that were developed that made to for the $1.2 billion in ARP. The first one is provide payments to child care providers serving families receiving subsidy to be used exclusively for the recruitment of new staff and retention of existing staff. 2, eliminate co-payments for families receiving subsidy. 3, advertise the child care subsidy program. 4, pay subsidized child care providers based on enrollment and not attendance, beginning July 1, 2021 through 2024, which we heard from Betsy as well as Jonathan about. And then also funding additional 3,000 high-quality child care, high-quality contracted infant toddler slots to help families get back to work. So while we've identified those top 5 immediate concerns that address the field and help families, there are another 15 recommendations, which you can find in the report, and I did provide the link in the testimony. And then I also wanted to highlight the National Association for the Education of Young Children did conduct a survey between June 17th and July 5th, where more than 7,500 respondents nationwide participated. 306 of them were Pennsylvania providers. And so the data in terms of Pennsylvania mirrors very much the national data. It tells a similar story. And so out of the 306 Pennsylvania respondents, 67% were child care centers and 20% were family child care homes. An overwhelming majority, 79% of child care centers are experiencing staffing shortages right now. Of those experiencing shortages, 60% are centers serving fewer children. This is not a case of families not needing child care, as 41% of the child care centers have a longer waiting list, and 30% are unable to open classrooms. The majority, 57% of Pennsylvania providers, are finding it more difficult to recruit and retain qualified educators compared to prior to the pandemic. Wages have been identified by 78% of respondents as the main recruitment challenge. Pennsylvania providers are operating at an average enrollment of 62% of their license capacity, with 56% of enrolled children attending on an average day. So staffing shortages, low wages, and a broken market mean that substantial and sustainable public investments are needed for this essential sector to recover and rebuild. Despite the increasing understanding of the vital importance of high-quality child care for children, families, businesses, the economy, the system has been deeply underfunded for many years. And as a result, children are not getting what they need. Families are paying more for child care than housing, as Jonathan shared. And the workforce is paid so little that half of them live in families that depend on public assistance. So keeping in mind that in Pennsylvania, the median wage in 2009 for child care workers was only $10.69 an hour, which Carol mentioned, and $13.96 for preschool teachers. Early childhood educators earn low wages, even though we know that skilled, supported, and knowledgeable early childhood educators are the cornerstone of quality, and that low compensation undermines that quality. In addition, turnover of teachers has a negative impact on the children in care who need stable, positive relationships to survive. So the pandemic has really highlighted the dangerous negative effects of underfunded child care system. And so I wanted to also share in terms of one of those effects is the serving only a fraction of eligible children through child care subsidy. And also still struggling to pay for the actual cost of quality. And parents, especially women jumping out of the labor market, struggling to return to work because of the lack of child care. Pre-pandemic, over 114,000 children in Pennsylvania were served in subsidized child care. So children and families really depend on that public-supported child care infrastructure and represent largely the entry wage labor force. Now, only 83,000 children are enrolled. While this is the case, 200,000 children under 5 who are eligible for child care subsidy, 81% of them are unserved. There are 119,000 infants and toddlers eligible for subsidized child care. 85% of them are unserved. Employer hiring will be stunted by the shortage of child care subsidy and the supply of child care overall. So at the state level, it's really critical that the Wolf administration allocates that $1.2 billion in federal child care funds as soon as possible. The longer we wait, the more teachers leave the field, the fewer classrooms we will have operating, and ultimately the more programs that will close, negatively impacting families as they return to work. And so at the federal level, we are urging Congress for that substantial, sustainable investment, similar to what is in the American Families Plan and Jobs Plan, and which is a big step in the right direction to addressing childcare affordability, accessibility, and infrastructure, as well as pre-K access and quality. And so I just want to thank you very much for the opportunity and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I just want to be sure you submitted your notes and testimony.
I sent
very
them,
valuable.
Yes, to Nicole Brunner.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Yep, sure.
Thank you so much. So we have quite a few people want to ask questions. I'm going to ask you to take about 20 minutes for the questions to get through it if we can. First question will come from Representative Longetti.
Thank you all for your testimony. So the Educator Retention Awards, I agree with with you that we need to get those reinstituted. I've written to the Wolf administration. Many of my colleagues have signed on to that. Just want to get your feedback, though, because I heard this from some other providers, on whether or not the rules for who can receive that award should be broadened. And I ask that in the context of, we heard some providers say we could have a very experienced teacher that perhaps doesn't have all the degrees, but is very effective in the classroom, but they don't get the award. So I want to ask that. And then the other question I want to ask, I always worry, like with Keystone Stars, high quality is so important, right? But does everybody understand what those stars mean? And whether or not we should be considering, I know it's hard to change, but a rebranding, whether it's platinum, gold, silver, bronze, something that better communicates what high quality is. So those are my two questions. Whoever wants to jump in.
Definitely with the first one with stars, has to be rebranded. Anytime I tour or things like that, I mention what licensing is and what a star 4 is. They were like, oh my gosh, you do all this 10 times more than what a licensing place is. And it's a lot of work. With the staffing that we have, like I said, we have that core 16. We only have about 21 teachers right now. We should have about 47. So we can't do the maximum classrooms and stuff too because of the staffing shortage as well. It's hard when you come in, like you said, I can go, hey, I want a job, I love kids, I want to do teaching at Westchester University, and I say, well, it's $10 an hour, and you have to get a $37 FBI clearance, you have to pay for a child abuse clearance, you have to get mandated reporting. You can't use your FBI from the university because that doesn't count, that's an education. We need one from DHS. So to apply for me, you have to pay about $75 to get the $10 job. So they go right on to Wawa and Target, a lot of them, because they can't afford that. So if we could cover clearances, that would be great, especially for nonprofits, especially for childcare workers, like they would in the school system, because we actually are real teachers. And we're the ones that make the difference when they get to the elementary schools, because they do have a leg up on everything. And also when Representative Herrin was down, one of the points I wanted to make before was just kind of like people, why does childcare matter? Why does Keystone Stars matter and all this? And we walked out of a classroom and I was like, in that classroom, in that one classroom, you have 2 kids that are going to the IU. You have a child that was abused as an infant who goes to our school. You have your hairdressers, you have people who own your pizza places, you have restaurants, you have your workers, you have your beauty salon. In that one classroom represented everything that would affect everybody's lives. And it was a slice of just heaven because of the multiracial and ethnicities we have in that room. It's like a utopia. But everybody needs to realize that they need to invest in those kids because their lives will be affected whether they have kids or don't. So for my teachers with the education retention, they absolutely don't qualify. The one that's there for 28 years doesn't have a degree. This was her passion her entire life, and she wouldn't qualify. So thankfully my board does appreciate that, and the couple that don't, we cover. But if you want to pay your teachers and they get to, I don't know the exact number, 25,000 to 30,000, you're not going to qualify for an education retention. That's too much money. And it's like, it goes against everything we want to do. We want to pay them more and give them these bonuses throughout the year. So definitely revamping and getting that word out would be awesome.
Just in terms of the Keystone Stars, my wife and I are both educated. We don't have that much time to do extra reading, but we still don't understand the Keystone Star system. We looked it up, we tried to read about it. I mean, we get it in theory, but when we would be touring places, they would be telling us very proudly, we have 2 stars, and we're like, okay. I mean, the back room smells like mold, and seriously. I just wanted to say one other thing. I don't mean for it to be a bad joke, but everybody keeps talking about how there's a job at Wawa and Target that pays more, and at those places you don't have to change everybody's diapers. So that's a serious thing. When it's not your own kid, I can only imagine. So.
Thank you. Representative Delisio, and then we'll just go straight down the line to Representative Williams, so each one, make it easy.
Thank you, Joe.
always lots of questions if anybody is familiar with me, but so I think that I forget if it was Carol or Kim who mentioned that there's a lot of bipartisan support for early childhood education. How from where you sit, because this is my 11th year, and I actually do serve this session as the minority chair of the Children and Youth Committee. Mark serves as the minority chair of the Education Committee, and he's co-chair of the Early Childhood Education Caucus. So I would venture to say it's got our undivided attention. So that bipartisan support, from where you sit, how do you think that best would translate into meaningful action that gets the financial support that this sector needs to not just survive but to thrive? Because individually, I think up here we're pretty smart. Collectively, we should approach genius. Yet, this is the same conversation that session after session we are challenged with. You, from your advocacy standpoint, I'm sure you've given this testimony previously. This is not new testimony. How do we get this over the goal point? How do we ensure that quote-unquote bipartisan support translates to sufficient and appropriate action at the end of the day? What are we doing wrong? And it could be everything.
I think I'd probably start out by saying, obviously there's competing priorities. While there is bipartisan support, sometimes other priorities take precedent. So that's our job, to advocate to make sure that we do get those continued investments in pre-K. For pre-K Count and Head Start, for example, we have had increases. We've been blessed to have increases over the last several fiscal years. We're not where we should be. There's still many children, over 100,000 children that are still, eligible but unserved. So I think just those competing priorities sometimes.
Yeah, I think when we start to talk about the numbers, right, the money, that's the tricky part, because there's not been a real interest in new sources of revenue at the state level. And the gap in terms of the financial gap is pretty significant. We've been, I'm not going to use advocating for federal input as well, because I think we all know it's pretty clear families will never be able to afford the true cost of care. And we don't see any way around it but that there is a huge investment, and that probably starts at the federal level. So we're working in tandem there to ensure that happens. So, I know your colleagues in terms of that, and the appetite people have also at the state level to look for additional sources of revenue to begin to tackle that issue.
Sometimes I wonder, Carol, that we don't shoot too low. I've seen those line items, and I've had the opportunity for our appropriations staff to give me a 101 on the line items that fall under the oversight of the Children and Youth Committee. And I would say, and I'm at the beginning of that learning curve, having served on this committee for 4 years as a rank and file member 4 years ago, and now in this position, that I'm thinking we're shooting too low. I agree that if the federal government can get if the president can get his human infrastructure bill through, that goes a long way to leveraging this. But I worked with the waiting list campaign. Those parents were intellectually disabled. And I remember under the Corbett administration, they were so grateful that they were coming around saying thank you for what was in essence crumbs.
Well, and we are too, right? So we say at least we got an increase.
Yeah.
Other people didn't get an increase. At least we got an increase.
I think the context.
Yeah.
We need to frame it differently. So we're, thank you for the increase, but it's far from sufficient. This is the delta. This is the gap. What's your problem? And how do we kick it? So I would say, and bring a whole group of those infants and toddlers with you. That would be a short, efficient, effective meeting at the end of the day.
I don't know if I want to torture them.
childhood education, yet I'm struck by this is primarily under the purview of the Department of Human Services as opposed to education. And I'm wondering again, and it talks about framing and context. So I have colleagues who think this is, in fact, kind of glorified babysitting with no understanding apparently of child development. So I've often wondered, I don't think I've had this conversation with Mark yet, but should this also be somehow part of the responsibility of the Department of Education to frame the conversation differently? Shouldn't this not be part of our education system from, birth through when they go to post-secondary? And I wouldn't mind hearing some thoughts on that to see if that was, and I know that's not a switch that gets thrown or an easy answer, but again, we've been sort of stuck at this plateau. The plateau isn't getting us where we need to be.
Well, you're going to hear yes from me. You're not going to hear anything other than a yes.
Just to let you know, Senator Brown has advocated move to line items for childcare under education. You don't have to change the responsibilities, but he's framed it as there are some colleagues that think broadly, welfare bad, education good. They look at human services as welfare, childcare as welfare.
Yeah. And yes, absolutely. And at the same time, we also have, we know that there's a lot that isn't working with the kind of K-12 system. So it becomes this mixed bag, oh my gosh, or is it then going to get lumped in there and face the same kind of challenges that that system is facing right now as well. So that's the conundrum. But certainly, I would say the Department of Education speaking to this and actually doing the educating and ensuring that everyone gets it, both in the legislative level and at the governor's level, that everybody really gets this and they get the word out and there's that level of buy-in. So that there isn't also this perceived competition for funding in the K-12. With scarce resources, competition starts to happen, which is fake competition because one source is the other. We're really supporting the strength of the K-12 system, as I said, with, when you look at it, decreased investments then in special ed, which is a huge drain. I don't even know if I want to say it that way, which is a huge financial item, in that system. And there's a real opportunity here to work together, but, in a scarcity conversation, we often don't see it that way.
I don't mean to cut you off, but just in the interest of time, we have 7 questions and 2 more testifiers, so we just keep it brief.
Yeah.
I want to make sure everyone has a chance. We only have an hour left.
Okay. Just one positive, I guess, is that the Office of Child Development and Early Learning is a dual report to the Department of Education and Human Services. So that's a strength that we do have.
Thank you.
Just a quick comment and then 2 quick questions to the ladies. Thank you, Ms. Austin. I believe that we need to have you on the House floor with your brutal honesty. All 203 of us need to hear, and I just sense that you're probably holding yourself back. We need you on the floor unleashed. So thank you.
Last year I learned that is the only way to be.
Yeah. So thank you.
There's no
appreciate
time.
To Ms. Billy, you had mentioned about what I thought were unfunded mandates for nutrition, and you had mentioned a program. I know you mentioned co-stars, but there was another program you used initials for. It was C something.
CACFP, Child and Adult Care Food Program.
Okay, thank you so much.
Which is very, very important for our kids, especially because they're getting free breakfast, lunch, snack, all included with our very low fee, because we try and make sure it's low. But like I said, the requirements, it has to be real meat, it has to be child nutrition labeled, it has to be fruit, it has to be certain yogurts, less sugars, no juice, just to meet those requirements. For I have 93 kids enrolled right now, we'll be putting about $45,000 in, because you can't meet those requirements with what you get reimbursed.
All right, thank you so much. And then for Mr. Reaganese, you had said that you had some recommendations for improvement. And I don't know if I missed those or if that's something that you'd like, if you give us the top 2 recommendations of what you think we necessarily need or need to do?
Yeah, I basically I had a couple things written down. I mean, the one was brought up about the Keystone Stars. I just think it's not effective from a parent standpoint. And I think that we've covered the other ones pretty thoroughly in the other testimonies, with especially the wage gaps and the retention. I mean, I in my position at the university, I also educate educators. And it's not that much different in the music education industry. You're faced with what seems like a safe job market if you want to love music and you want to help music in our society, but you're not going to get paid as much and you might have to move and all these kinds of things. And that's always a challenge to tell someone who believes in something, who wants to do their best, that it's going to be an uphill battle even though they deserve more. And I think that we've seen it, even though Betsy has such a great retention rate of teachers. We even see in my son's classroom, it's still hard to keep. There's a kind of a revolving door of really great younger people who really want to do this and have a great relationship with my son. Then they have to go elsewhere, or they have to go back to school, or they have to go here, or they have to go there. And he sees that revolving door too, and that's difficult for his emotional well-being as well. So.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Representative Sappy.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. Quick question on retention, and I'm pleased to hear that you have folks that have been with you for so long, Betsy. But I do have some centers in my district that have talked to me about retention and the challenges with certification and licensing. And could you talk any of you talk a little bit about the process for some of your instructors or care providers to be licensed or certified by the state? I know some of these folks that I've heard from are trying to complete a higher education so that they can, stay, do more, earn more, and that becomes a tremendous challenge because they're trying to do the job. They can't always, commit to the hours that finishing a degree demands. So can you talk a little bit about that? Thanks.
With my staff, again, many just came right from high school. This is what I want to do. So for STARS 4, again, which probably is not put out there as much as it should, you have to have everybody have either a degree or what's called a CDA, a Child Development Associate credential, which means you go to class for almost 2 years, you learn about it, you show off, they come in and do interviews, they have to watch you teach. So right now, we just had our last two get their CDAs, the one that had been there about 29 years and the one that's been there about 6. So right now, all of my staff have CDAs. I'm very lucky to have one with associates and about 4 with bachelor's degree, which is kind of unheard of, again, in childcare. But like Jonathan was saying, it's the turnover rate with everything else. The staff shortage, I've never seen it this bad in 30 years, never. And we do have to keep rooms. I have to keep it at 6. It could be at 12, and there's people on that waiting list for ELRC that I have in my book. I can't take them because I don't have the staff. My staff is working like 9-10 hours now, just for me to be here. I had to get coverage for me because I'm the only administrator, the only full-time administrator. And it's a $1.3 million business, and I'm the only administrator. We can't afford secretaries and administrative people full-time. So there has to be something, if it's not the retention, something, just treat us like teachers. Treat us like, right off the bat, you're not Department of Ed, you're not education. It's a stigma right off the bat that you're not education being childcare. And that's just gotta stop. We're not welfare, we're not, we're people, we're teachers. I got my staff a shirt that says we're not babysitters, we're pandemic warriors. That they're all out of wear now because I am so against that stigma. But yeah, it's very, very hard, and I think if you don't go above and beyond for your staff, kind of like we do with my 16 core, you're not going to get them to stay. It's too hard to, you said, to have a family and maintain at these rates.
Thank you very much. Just recently with our budget, we did a level up with funding with our schools. It wasn't perfect, but it did increase funds. It's almost like we should be doing this in this category as well, and possibly then your child care workers won't have to also work another job. And I took notes, and I wanted to confirm that you said that often child care workers have a second job as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Or you have staff that are unsubsidized. How is that? And I do. I have staff that are unsubsidized. I'm the one that's employing them, and they don't make enough that they have to have their kids unsubsidized. That says, a ton right there, that we can't pay them enough that they're qualifying for subsidized.
50%. 50% of teachers, of child care workers, receive supplemental SNAP benefits. Okay?
Ridiculous.
Don't have enough money. That's how it is.
So if you total everything that they're receiving as well as their second job, that is your increase right there?
Correct.
And giving plenty of time for further education, quality of life, I mean, we haven't even addressed that, and possibly the ability to stay because your work life has balance. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I'll say that, we have the pre-K counts program, which requires that teachers have a bachelor's degree and be certified. And in Pennsylvania, that's a pre-K to 3, third grade certification. So of course those teachers are going to move to K-12. They can make a lot more money than they are. Double the amount of money in the K-12 system. So that's the reality we're facing.
And that's why pay parity is important for those that have the bachelor's degrees, that they should be making what a K through 12 teachers make with a bachelor's degree.
And their state's doing that already.
Yeah.
Pennsylvania needs to.
Thank you, Representative Williams.
I'll try to make this brief because I think I've answered so many questions. I'll make this a little bit more pragmatic. 2 things I'd like to ask. 1, could you encourage your son or your daughter to enter into child care? How would you encourage them to do that? And why would you encourage them to do that? The second question is, Ms. Earley, you highlighted some of the inequities that we have as a result of the pandemic. My question really is, do you think the low wages within the child care industry have anything to do with the gender bias?
Yes, because the field is predominantly women, it's predominantly minority women. Yes, that is the reason why the wages are lower. And most child care staff do not have benefits, which is another issue. They can get benefits in other places. So, yes.
And you have a question? No, I would not encourage them. It may sound like heresy. But one of the things that we confront is what counselor in a high school or in a college in good conscience would encourage their student to enter the field and know that they're going to make what they're making, that they're going to struggle. So I think that's the conundrum that we face.
I just want to echo the sentiment of Representative Hill Evans that your passion and your compassion is appreciated. I think some of these conversations take place in this sort of esoteric fear that make no sense down on the ground. And until we at least get to that kind of conversation, I think we just spin our wheels. So thank you very much.
Thank you. When you have that true passion, I think, for education, it will come through. My youngest works for me. She's going to eligible for special education occasionally. And I said the same thing. You're not going to make anything. Find something else. My other daughter works for me. She has a master's, but she's working for me and working 2 other jobs. So it's the same thing. I'm a parent who's watching that happen. But when you have that kind, she's going to make a difference in early childhood. I know she is. So I'm going to encourage that. But with the stigma of like, you're going to be having a second job.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. The last question for this group panel, Representative Zabel.
Thank you. I want to thank Representative Herrin for calling together this particular policy hearing. When this pandemic started, my children were 2 and 4, so I have been living this on the parent side right there with you. And I think my colleagues from the legislative standpoint and you as experts in this have brought up a lot of issues that I want you to know really are, I think you hear, are at the forefront of our mind, particularly when it comes to funding and making sure that you're supported and that we have that capacity. And on a personal level, I have been living that. We are a 2 working parent household, and we very much have to be. So I want to ask this from a sort of parenting standpoint, because I'll be honest, just on a personal level, there have been times in the last year and a half where I have not I have been deficient as a parent as a result of childcare access, the need to work. Of course, there's some people who cannot work at all during those circumstances, but then there are times where both mom and dad have something to do that they absolutely have to do. I have the luxury sometimes of being able to move stuff around, but there are times, and I know every parent has to deal with this, where I'm either going to satisfy the demands of my professional career or or the emotional needs of my child, and you wind up. I at least have wound up sacrificing one or the other, usually in favor of my child, but there are times where I can't. That have sacrificed, I think, family life and frankly their emotional health on that. And when childcare is robust and in place, and we've been lucky enough to have that for a large portion, my reservoir of patience and emotional intelligence, is all there as well. So I was happy to see, for example, Jonathan on there, but I know all of you deal with that. I will also mention before I toss it to you for your thoughts on this. I'm a former teacher myself. The youngest I taught was 12 years old, but there's no question that early childhood care is education. It's some of the most important. At 12 years old, I would look at people who taught younger grades and the amount of intelligence, dexterity, concentration, stamina that is needed to help shape these kids in the most important years of their lives. You are absolutely educators. But from the parent end, that's what I'm really curious to hear about. Because we hear about it, how it affects the labor and our labor supply, our work shortage in terms of parents. But in terms of the emotion and the strain and the quality of family life, I'm telling you, it's affected disabled. Have you heard of that, or can you speak to that person? Not about disabled, but
No, I can certainly talk about the Decker Reaganeses for sure. Like I said at the beginning, my son Emma's our first child. We got a very real look because of the pandemic of just how important it is to have there be multiple hands and different social situations for the child, because we were starting to kind of lose our minds with just a 9-month-old all the time. And I have a sister who is a stay-at-home mom and has 3 children. And I still don't know how she possibly does that emotionally and physically. I don't know how the teachers do it at the school for absurdly long hours with a room full of 8 of them. But from our perspective, when we got our son in quality care, it made us feel whole again. It brought back a type of positivity where we could communicate better, where we had time to deal with bills, moving, just all the details, the taxes, etc. Whereas if we had to have that all day, plus now we have a 2.5-month-old, one of us just has to be gone, which is basically what it amounts to, and that doesn't feel right either. So having that sacred time to be able to keep everything afloat gives us the time to be emotionally invested and to feel whole.
I couldn't agree more with that, but I appreciate that. I think sometimes people are reluctant to admit their shortcomings.
It cost us a lot too. I'm right there with you.
If there's anything good to come of the pandemic, I think that was the realization of a lot of parents that, oh my gosh, how did they do this? It actually, it really resonated with them of like John said, I'm going to drop off 1 and they're going to have 8, they're going to have 10, they're going to have 20, and they're actually have quality care. So I think that respect level definitely has, come out of pandemic at least for that.
Well, thank you. The questions have been great. And the one thing that I've taken away from this as I sat here is that we are deficient as a state in all human services, from the earliest to the oldest. We've seen through the pandemic that we've had issues on both spectrums of this, and we tend to praise those who are not taking care of our youth and our elderly as heroes when they're not the heroes sitting in front of us and within all of our facilities. So I hope as legislators that we all feel that way, and we go back and look at who our real heroes are and who those $1 million salaries should be going to, rather than maybe where they are going. So with that, I'll pass it back to Representative Herrin for our next 2 testifiers.
Yes, and thank you for these great questions. So we're going to move on to some of the more nuts and bolts of the importance of early childhood education to our economy. And we will start with Dr. Laura Crispin, who's an associate professor of economics and the program director for undergrad and graduate public policy at St. Joseph's University. Dr. Crispin earned her PhD in economics from Ohio State University and received her BA in economics from Northeastern. As an economist, Dr. Crispin has a passion for education policy and has seen firsthand how high-quality education prepares students for higher ed and for the workforce. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to your testimony.
Great, thank you so much for having me. As you said, I'm Dr. Laura Crispin. I'm a professor at St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia. I'm a labor economist with specific interest in economics of education. Today my testimony is going to be related to my professional expertise, but I think it's important to mention related to your question. My daughter was 3 when the pandemic started. She is now 5 and going to be entering kindergarten in just a few short weeks. So while this issue is both professionally relevant to me, it's also very personally important to me. I want to start by just saying thank you very much for considering policies to address both access and affordability of childcare in Pennsylvania, especially in the wake of the pandemic. As many of the previous speakers have said, childcare and early childhood education serve several critical functions. At minimum, childcare provides a safe and healthy environment for children, which is a necessary support for working parents. Childcare also provides additional opportunities, specifically for education. It develops cognitive and non-cognitive skills. And studies have shown that attendance in early childhood education programs offered through daycare centers and preschools improve school readiness in reading and math, reduce achievement gaps by improving outcomes for disadvantaged children. And there are also longer-term effects such as higher educational attainment and higher earnings in the labor market. So while it's important to invest in the early education of our children, we can also consider this as an investment in our future workforce, both their skills and productivity. As we have heard, the market for childcare right now is broken. There are significant childcare shortages nationally as well as within Pennsylvania. We've seen reports from nearly every national and regional newspaper, specifically like this past summer, related to these shortages. These shortages are stemming, as we've heard, from 2 supply-side factors. The first is temporary and permanent closures of childcare facilities due to COVID, and the second is staffing shortages. Regarding the first, as we've heard, many childcare centers closed in March 2020 due to COVID, and many were not able to reopen. A recent study found that 86% of childcare centers in Pennsylvania closed at some point due to COVID, and by June of last year, 125 childcare centers in our state had closed permanently. Recent reports by NACE indicate that by July of last year, 18% of childcare centers had remained closed, and 1 year later, July of this year, a third of childcare workers surveyed were considering leaving their childcare center or closing their in-home family center. This indicates that closures will be a considerable problem for childcare access during the pandemic recovery period. The childcare shortages that are not due to closures are likely due to staffing shortages. The earlier reference report finds that 80% of childcare workers surveyed report staffing shortages with 1 or more vacant positions, and we've heard testimony about that as well. It may be difficult for childcare centers to fill these positions due to the relatively low wages of childcare workers, which again we've already heard about. In Pennsylvania, the mean hourly wage of childcare workers was $11.57, with a corresponding annual salary just over the poverty level of about $24,000. For comparison, retail sales occupations in Pennsylvania, the mean hourly wage was almost $3 higher, $14.22. When workers can transition to higher pay in other occupations with potentially fewer responsibilities, it's unlikely that childcare centers will be able to attract the amount of workers needed to fill these vacant positions. These labor shortages may result in childcare centers closing classrooms, reducing the number of children enrolled, or closing altogether, which further compounds the earlier mentioned issues. And this is indeed what we're beginning to see. In Pennsylvania, 79% of childcare centers are experiencing a labor shortage, leading to 30% being unable to open classrooms and 60% serving fewer children. To Taken together, these factors will lead to a sizable decrease in the supply of childcare, and economic theory predicts that there may be fewer open spots for children and that the price of childcare may rise in response. It is important to note that childcare is already very expensive, as we've already heard. In Pennsylvania, the average annual cost of childcare for one preschool-age child is nearly $10,000, which is 14% of the median household income. This cost rises quickly for more than one child. Turning to the economic effects of this childcare shortage, reduction in supply of childcare has had and will continue to have several cascading effects on the economy, particularly with respect to the labor market. When spaces are limited, those without access to childcare will either need to turn to informal options, which may be unlicensed, unregulated, or unreliable, or they will need to leave the workforce or reduce their work hours to provide care for their child. And we have seen evidence of this over the last year and a half. The December 2020 jobs report was particularly concerning. This report showed that there was a net loss of 140,000 jobs nationwide, and all of the jobs lost were women's jobs. The more recent jobs reports have not shown the strong recovery that some predicted following the vaccine rollout. In June 2021, with many employers reopening and hiring, there were a record 10.1 million job openings nationally. However, only 6.7 million hires. This is suggesting significant labor shortages across our country, across states, across industries, and occupations. One cause of these shortages is likely due to lack of access to or uncertainty about childcare, particularly for women. Throughout the pandemic, researchers have studied working parents and the effect of childcare closures on work, both at the extensive and intensive margins, meaning the decision to work or not work, and if working, how many hours to work. And all have found that working parents have been negatively affected by these childcare closures, but that there are significant gender differences. For instance, studies of the early pandemic found that mothers were more likely to take temporary leave from their jobs due to increased childcare responsibilities. Other studies have found that women took on more childcare responsibilities than fathers, and this led many mothers to reduce their labor market work hours or to leave the labor market altogether. These findings indicate that there is an immediate effect of childcare closures, and that was to pull many working mothers out of the labor market, although those who remained working took on much of the childcare responsibilities, creating what has been coined a double bind. This is where working parents work full-time while also parenting at home, which we've heard. That has been my experience as well. This has had significantly adverse effects on parents' mental health and their well-being. The labor market implications for childcare closures were not isolated to the early stage of the pandemic, but have persisted throughout. Recent studies have shown that labor force participation rates for parents, and particularly mothers, is slower for recovery than for non-parents. Studies have found that the flow of workers from employment to exiting the labor force more than doubles throughout the pandemic and is larger for women with children. One important note is that one study finds that work flexibility, which is the opportunity to set one's own work hours, is the most critical for working mothers and actually more important than the option of remote work. Combined, these studies clearly show that without access to childcare, workers will continue to reduce their work hours or remain out of the labor force altogether. To tie this into broader economic impacts, without access to affordable, high-quality childcare, parents, and especially mothers who have left the labor force may be unable to re-enter, and this would lead to persistent labor shortages. This has macro-level effects on our economy, such as lower productivity and a slower return to normal economic growth and full employment. This has micro-level implications for workers and their families. The longer a worker remains out of the labor force, the more difficult it may be to rejoin, and this may also cause disruptions in career growth and earnings. Because women have been disproportionately impacted, we may also see an increase in the gender wage gap. To conclude, we cannot fully reopen our economy without access to high-quality, affordable childcare. There's not one easy solution, as you well know, and so considering a multifaceted approach needs to help on both the supply side with childcare providers, as well as on the demand side with working parents and their families. Again, thank you for this opportunity to speak with you, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Crispin. We'll move on to our final testifier, Katie Personette, who's the Deputy Campaign Manager at the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center. Ms. Personette, prior to her current role, worked as an organizing associate with We the People PA campaign, where she hosted community conversations and candidate forums on topics including adequate and equitable funding for K-12 education. She has her degree in anthropology with a sociology minor from Kutztown. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony today and the critical importance of state investment in our child care system. At this point, we're all aware of the tremendous impact that high-quality child care and early childhood education have on a child's future performance and success. We've heard from several of us today. Our children's brains go through their most rapid development in the first 3 years of life, and a child's environment plays a central role in this development. Kids who participate in quality early childhood education programs have shown higher cognitive abilities, academic achievement in reading and math, and higher college attendance and less involvement in crime than those who do not have access to quality child care. A couple of us have already said this as well. Investments in quality child care programs will lead down the road to a stronger workforce and higher earnings, which will greatly benefit individuals who participated in these programs and our state as a whole. One study estimates that for each dollar we spend in early care and education programs, the return to society will be $17. Despite these well-known benefits, Pennsylvania continues to underinvest in our children during the critical development stages before kindergarten, from ages 0 to 5. Pennsylvania serves only 19% of over 200,000 children under age 5 living in families that are eligible for Pennsylvania's Child Care Work Subsidy Program, and only about 41% of the children serving in high-quality programs. Our child care crisis today is still aptly described by a phrase popularized by early childhood advocates in the 1990s. Quote, "Parents can't afford to pay, teachers can't afford to stay. There's got to be a better way." Parents can't afford to pay. The Economic Policy Institute recently released state data on the cost of child care across the United States. In Pennsylvania, the average cost of infant care is $11,842 per year, which is $987 per month for one child. The cost for a 4-year-old in care is slightly less, $9,773 per year, or $814 per month. These amounts are 79% and 2/3 respectively of the full-time, full-year earnings of a minimum wage earner in Pennsylvania, given our minimum wage of $7.25 per hour. While there is often a lot of discussion among families and in the media about the cost of our sending your child to college, there is less conversation about the cost of child care. Yet in Pennsylvania, infant care costs just $2,692 less a year than in-state tuition at a public 4-year college. That is 82% of college costs. Infant care costs more than the average cost of housing for a year, as it was said previously, 8.1% or $11,842 compared to $10,879 for housing. These costs make quality care impossible to access for low-wage workers in our state without public support for such care. Take, for example, a minimum wage worker earning $7.25 per hour in Pennsylvania. They would have to work full-time 40 hours a week for nearly 10 months to be able to afford the average cost of infant care for one child. That is 79% of their yearly earnings. The United States Department of Health and Human Services has set the affordability limit for child care at 7% of one's income. That is, child care is considered affordable if it costs no more than 7% of a family's income. But 7% is a long way from 79%. Even a 2-parent family with both parents earning the minimum wage puts child care widely out of range. This family would need to spend 39% of its family income on childcare. Add in the cost of care for another child, and the expense is absolutely impossible. Lack of affordable and accessible childcare is a barrier to employment for Pennsylvania's young children. Even before the pandemic, 2 months before it began, Governor Wolf's Workforce Command Center in January of 2020 identified access to quality childcare as one of the 5 main barriers to employment for Pennsylvania residents. The Command Center highlighted both access to affordability of childcare as barriers for job seekers. Fast forward to a year and a half after our state has been ravaged by the pandemic. Access to quality care has declined even further, with fewer regulated providers, now 6,900, down from 8,000. Our state's number remains higher than pre-pandemic times, in part because of the lack of access and affordability of care. Many parents cannot return to the labor force, as also was mentioned. Teachers can't afford to stay. One of the main challenges to accessible, affordable care identified from the Command Center and known to everyone close to the industry is staffing, recruitment, and retention, primarily related to low wages in the industry. In 2020, the median wage for childcare workers in Pennsylvania was $10.69 an hour, which is right around the federal poverty line for a family of 3 for a full-time, full-year worker. Pennsylvania early educators pay a penalty for working with younger children despite clear evidence the critical importance of this developmental stage. In fact, early educators with a BA are paid 22% less than their colleagues in K-8 schools. Such low pay, often with little access to benefits, has resulted since the 1980s in difficulty in retaining quality staff and in more highly educated educators leaving the industry, as documented in Losing Ground in Early Childhood Education, written by the Keystone Research Center staff and published by the Economic Policy Institute in 2005. The child care workforce is also aging, which will continue to fuel the child care crisis in future years if we don't ensure these are quality jobs. There's got to be a better way. The better way is stronger public investment in high-quality child care at both the federal and state level. The unprecedented federal emergency response to the COVID-19 crisis provides us with a tremendous opportunity to invest in an industry and workforce that serves as a backbone for our economy. We saw this clearly during COVID. When child care centers and schools shut down, many parents could not work and our economy ground to a halt. Investment in quality child care will help kids and families in the short term and allow parents to go back to work. In the long term, this investment will pay for itself 17 times over. For the future of Pennsylvania, it is the smartest investment we can make. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I know we have a couple questions. Representative Kim.
Thank you both for your testimony. It's very informative. I wanted to start off with a quick anecdote. About 5 years ago, I was on a show called Face the State, and I was between 2 of the political pundits, and I was talking about the importance of kindergarten and early education. And they said on air, they're both 2 men in their 60s, "Tony, when did you go to school?" 6. "When did you go to school?" 6. "We did pretty good." On air. And it was hard not to react, but the public sentiment has taken a long time from babysitter to actually educators. So I'm just so grateful for this policy hearing to get the word out. The pandemic has shone a light on the problem. The good thing about the pandemic, it is showing how important employees and workers are right now. I think there's going to be a real need to entice. You see sign-on notices right now. I'm hoping that these private organizations that have lots of money for their CEOs and all that other perks to entice workers with on-site daycares or free gym membership, whatever, to make sure that we have employees. Without employees, they don't make money. What are the benefits benefits of on-site daycare centers, and do you see anyone going in that direction, like, companies providing healthcare insurance and daycare to make sure that these families feel good about where they work and that their kids are safe? Any thoughts on that?
I'm actually concerned that we might see employers moving in the opposite direction. I think we've seen that employers can lower their costs with employees working remotely. And so I think that actually disincentivizes them to invest in childcare centers. And so for those that remain working in person, I would hope that there would be a way that employers would consider that as an option, specifically for working mothers, to get women back in the labor force.
I know there's more spaces in these buildings, office buildings now that
Right, right.
We could use the space to have the kids there, they could check on them, happier employees, better workers. I just hope we have that trend. If it's a private company, they could pay the educators more money in terms of relying on state right? So that's all I have. Thank you very much for your feedback.
I would say that I'd be more interested in employers giving a voucher subsidy, enable the parent to go where they want to go. Because not every parent, you don't necessarily want, you don't know how long you're going to stay with that employer. You also may not necessarily want them on site. It depends. It varies. If you're on a day off, to then take them to the job for childcare or something like that. So it varies. I would rather see parent option. Though there are employers who are doing it, and I know the Pennsylvania Chamber is exploring, in the U.S. Chamber, these kinds of options. And we know that there's those on-site programs that exist. Merck has one, J&J used to have on-site childcare. There are any number of them. But I'd rather see options.
Anyone else? Thank you. Representative Nelson.
Thank you. And I appreciate this hearing and the important work that you guys are doing and sharing, not just the importance of child care, but the importance of adequately funding child care. It is, we keep talking about how much it costs the average family, but it costs the average family $10,000 plus a year because much of that is appropriately subsidized by state and county agencies, which is one of those items that we discuss in our budgets each year. And in fact, for the other members, one of the many items that was in the Legislative Black Caucus's budget equity priority list was about actually less than $500 million from the state that would bring all, not just child care, but would also bring our senior care and our direct care workers up to an adequate living. So we will continue to talk about and press that issue through the state. I also know that one of the other major issues that you guys wrestle with, and I appreciate that we're largely talking about wages, is insurance. Could you talk about, just briefly, a high level, the cost of insurance for many of our child care centers?
At our center, again, part of our center is to about
health insurance, and we pay about 75% of what it costs for their health care insurance, and they only have to pay the rest. But if they have a child or another family member, then that's on them as well. So we made that definitely a priority in our budget every year to be able to cover that and the increases that come.
And I was really thinking more around liability insurance for this.
What it costs, like, per year? Or?
Just on average, I understand those costs are increasing and taking up larger portions of your budgets.
Absolutely. And they're going to keep, I've never seen them go down, and I've never seen them level out. They've increased every single year. And there's multiple levels of the insurance that we have no choice about paying. So percentage-wise, I'm not sure, but it's a lot.
One of the other items that we're looking at is there is for medical professionals a program called Educator, which effectively kind of provides catastrophic liability coverage. It's actually an appropriation. It's a separate fund that we have that helps to keep the cost of medical insurance a little bit more reasonable for providers. We don't yet have a similar program for child care providers. It's one of those items that, since you all are amazing advocates and we're working on it now,
And that money would go directly probably back to teachers and hiring, so that would be incredible if we can umbrella us into that. And some employers do, as Ms. Kim was saying, with hiring, they do have like a flex pay. So if the incentive was there, I don't know taxes at all, but if it's, incentives for businesses were there to put into help or to put into their flex spending, where they match it kind of thing, that's been coming up a little bit more. So parents have been giving me some forms where they can save pre-taxed, for their childcare and stuff, and then they can withdraw from that. If more employers did that, I think they'd get the return tenfold in happy workers.
I'm so glad that you said that. That was actually one of the things I was thinking of, is both a parent and an economist. Flex savings accounts, FSA accounts for dependent care, a really good way for parents to be able to afford childcare. Many employers do contribute, but sometimes it's just, the pre-tax savings as an individual worker. They're capped at about $5,000 a year, I believe. So you cannot contribute more than $5,000 a year. As you heard, many people pay $10,000 or more per year. So something to do would be increase those caps. It would save parents a lot of money. I don't know if that's set at a federal or a state level. I'm not sure where those caps are coming from, but that would be one way that you'd be saving a lot of pre-tax money on the affordability side for parents.
I just got to mention to keep in mind that the 10,000 we're talking about, for parents, that's what got us where we are in terms of the wages. Okay, so that's the market rate, like what the market we think may be there, but that's not the true cost. And I just want to kind of keep pushing the envelope. That's not the true cost of really what it would have a high quality care. If you were to look to pay people more than the basic amount. Okay, so I just kind of want to keep putting that on the table. It's way more than that. It's closer to what I said earlier, that 18,000, et cetera. Okay?
And the child care subsidy program doesn't cover that cost for providers.
Exactly.
So they're actually losing money when they accept subsidy kids, especially at Star 4 level. It's just, as a business, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So, yeah.
Well, they get paid where the children come. So if you don't show up, you don't get paid, but you still have to pay the teachers. It's complicated.
Thank you, Representative Boyle.
Thank you, Representative Cerisi. There's certainly consensus here regarding the importance of early education, and I just personally want to thank the commitment of the early educators here. I think some of the issues that we're touching upon, like the gender pay gap, are just exacerbated by, frankly, the inability to pay early educators what they're worth in terms of the value that you are providing society. What's clear to me is the essence of this issue is revenue and the shortage of revenue as it pertains to what comes in through taxes and fees into state and local and the federal government. So my question is in relation to the labor economist here. One topic that I've only really become aware of to the extent of just how broad it is in this area and throughout the country is the underground economy, where we have so many businesses that are just not part of the traditional, just paying their taxes. They're not complying with the laws of local, state, and federal governments as it pertains to taxation, and we do not get the revenue that we should from them. Have there been studies, whether locally or in the state or nationally, estimating just how big the underground economy is?
Yes, there have been studies done. I don't know any in particular, so I don't have any statistics off the top of my head, but I can certainly get back to you with that.
I would suggest that you do a lot of work into it, because I think that is frankly, it's the elephant in the room.
Yeah, are you thinking about like childcare, provision of childcare particularly?
Well, what I'm talking about are businesses that are not complying with paying their fair share as it pertains to giving money taxes over to local, state, and federal.
Yeah, let me follow up with you about that. I don't know any off the top of my head, but I will recognize that.
Thank you. Representative Parker?
Good morning. Thank you to my colleagues, Cerisi, as well as Representative Herrin, and thanks for all of you for giving your heartfelt conversation. By me only being here 8 months, I'm a realist. I don't see things as half empty. They should already be full when we walk into the room. One of the things that really has been sitting not well with me is the fact that we're talking about education and we're talking about our children. And it shouldn't be like a hashtag. It should be done. It should be done today. One of the things that crossed my mind is a quote that I stumbled upon. The function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education, and that is by the late Reverend Dr. Martin. And I guess for me, as we're talking about it, and my colleague touched on something that I'm going to stay on my point is, we're talking about education. So if we're talking about it, has there been an overall real conversation versus the workers and the staff that you have in the care versus what teachers are, their salaries, collegiate level? Because what we need to really have the unpack of the 300-pound elephant in the room, certification versus individuals aren't certified. So when you're talking about it, you have educators who will pretty much, thumb their nose and their type of elitist world because they have 50,000 credentials, doctors, and then, doctors and all this, and then individuals who aren't, and that type of thing. That's why you're having the crash of the have versus the have-nots. Have we had that real philosophical conversation for why it's hard to retain individuals? If there are some type of incentive that you'll pay or you'll get some training for individuals to be able to teach their children, if you have them in their care from the tender age of this, they'll get this certification, then that'll be a bump up in their salary and overall some type of bonuses and incentives for the overall, because I'm hearing everybody, but ultimately this is a business. And if anybody wanted to work for certain corporations, they give their employees incentives if they want to go back to school and get certain jobs to make them an overall better worker. Are those the type of things that we've been having conversations, like line items that should be coming in your conversation, since budgets are on all of our different levels now, that, hey, we're seeing that our staff can do better and we can actually recruit more if we train them in this type of capacity, and there's certain bonus points or education if they can certify them. Has that conversation come up?
For us, part of it was that education change we were talking about before, and making sure everybody had that their passion, but they may not have, that credential. With the TEACH program, you've heard of that. We participate in that where some of their tuition is paid for by TEACH and we pay some. So they get a bonus when they've done it, they get an increase in their pay and all that. So we are totally invested in doing the TEACH funding, but it's when they can go and that kind of stuff. So we make sure that they get like 6 hours release time if they're doing a 3-hour class. So that's really good, but it also hurts us financially to support that because we do have to give the increases and all that. So that's a little misleading to say, here, participate in the TEACH program, they're going to get increased, but you get, nothing coming back, except paid financially. But if there was anything where, especially for nonprofits, because that's just my passion for them, when you don't have a licensed center or you're not, you're licensed, but if you don't have like a nursery certification or something like that, you do get snubbed upon as, it's not, true academic center. So I tell people when they tour too, look at the experience there, because experience should mean education. That is greater than somebody coming with a master's and a bachelor's that knows all the right answers, but somebody who has been living, teaching childcare, early childcare for 10 years. It means a lot more to me than the experience than it would be for you. So,
and I know that because also when you're looking at funders, they're going to want to see how many people are if you're in your type of business have the master's letter, the PhD, and all the certification. And then that can also justify me and you connected because I did work in family-owned business, so I did not take a corporate job, and I understand what it was like when my dad didn't get the checks to make sure that we had the type of benefits, you know, for our staff. And I understand. So I hear everything when you resonate, but that's what we got to unpack it to make sure that more individuals understand the personal sacrifice that you have when you're in a family-owned business. The famous line my dad used to always say, rest his soul, was, you eat what you kill, so if you don't kill, you don't. And that's pretty much it. Y'all know what I'm saying. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, I want to thank you all, and before we get to Representative Herrin to close this out, thank you all for your testimony, all the representatives that are here today. I think it's been enlightening. I think a lot of us know these issues exist, and we really need to find a path to be able to work together as a team on both sides of the aisle and both sides of the Capitol, you know, whether it's in the House or the Senate, and with the governor, to make sure these children have everything that they need. And early childhood, we know, keeps the educational process a lot easier, like it was addressed with special ed costs. It helps reduce future special ed costs, keeps these children in a path of success. I know when we had our son, we had to find a daycare center that we wanted to put him in, and we put him in with someone one-on-one for a while. But this is extremely important, and the cost of these children to go into daycare. I can't believe some of our friends who may have younger kids are now my nephews and nieces who have babies, and you go, how do you afford this? And how do you both work, or how do you keep a house and all that? And the pandemic only brought it even higher up. And like I stated before, I think it's a human resources need that we need to address, not only here in Pennsylvania, but as a nation, what we're doing with our human resources, our children and our adults and everything else. So thank you all for what you do, and with that I want to thank Representative Herrin. I'll turn it back over to her for closing statement.
Thank you, Rep. Cerisi. Just a quick note, Ms. Personette, have you submitted your testimony?
I have it here with me, and I can also email it better.
Terrific, thank you. It was very helpful. Thank you so much. So I just want to end by saying that, you know, we are incredibly fortunate here in Chester County. We have a lot of resources that other communities don't. We have Betsy Billy. And still, 50% of her rooms are not filled. And so we have families in need across this Commonwealth, in our dense urban areas, in our rural areas, everywhere. And this is not a partisan issue. This should not be a partisan issue. This is an economic issue. This is a very personal family issue. This is an educational issue for our children. And it is essential to the very social, excuse me, to the very social fabric of our society. And, you know, I was surprised to receive in my office a couple weeks ago a communication from an organization called Mission Reaganese, which is an organization of senior military leaders who was developed very specifically to pursue high-quality early childhood education in America, because they see this as a national security issue to ensure that we have a military and civilian population that is educated and physically fit. And they are calling on the State House to make critical investments in early childhood education. They say sometimes they have to turn people away because many applicants cannot meet the educational or physical fitness requirements, and it all starts very early on. This is the foundation that we have to build in order to help our children succeed and become leaders. So I do want to thank you all for your incredible ideas and for helping us understand the ways that we need to better define and create affordable early childhood education, higher quality early childhood education, and accessible early childhood education. We have had quite a few previous conversations. I have a list, I'm not going to read it into the record now, but I have 10 policy ideas that you have all shared with me that I will absolutely be sharing with all of my colleagues here. so that we can get together and work on these issues together. My office, with the help of Kevin Burke, who's standing in the back of the room, is also creating a video which features several of you that I'll also be sharing out so that we can get this message out there. And with that, I just want to again thank the township for hosting us. I want to thank all of our attendees for coming and participating and listening today. Certainly thank all of our testifiers for your very valuable testimony. I'd like to thank our Democratic Policy Committee and our Vice Chair, Joe Cerisi, for coming, and all 16 of the reps here who have shown up because they know how important this issue is. When I look at my colleagues here, you know, I've only been here 8 months, but what I see is a group of incredibly committed, caring, and very persistent legislators. We have so much human capital right here in this room, and we have to believe that we can make really good progress and we can get this done. So, again, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here today.
Thank you.